As I deal with grief, as I deal with sorrow, as I deal with depression and heaviness, that reaches a point of freezing, meaning that as I go into it, there's a certain point where I can't think, I can't feel, I go numb, and I'm just talking in a dissociated state because the pain has reached a point where the reptilian brain and its freeze protocol kicks in order to maintain functionality, right, rather than collapsing under the pain. And I'm finding, a couple of different sources to be medicinal in this state. One is Robert Bly and his men's work. And the other is Alice Miller, who I actually learned about through listening to Robert Bly. Alice Miller has written books such as The Body Never Lies, Drama of the Gifted Child, For Your Own Good. And I was reflecting on Alice's comments about the oppressive and destructive and misinformed basis upon which many therapists push their clients towards forgiveness of their parents and looking at things in a balanced point of view and all of this. And I found this interesting, so hence the video, because I'd say there's two elements of this. I began listening to Lazaris tapes about forgiveness while my parents were going through a destructive divorce, 15, 16, 17. Then I left the house and moved out at 17. And, so the Lazaris refrain, to forgive is for you. I think it's great Lazaris has said that it's not about reconciliation or forgetting, but about becoming free of the abuse and the offender. Now, I would say that other therapists have pushed the kind of reconciliation open to the love dynamic of your parent. I think particularly Maniko, one of my therapists, had that kind of as the strongest theme. But, within the general texts and, to some extent, Lazaris will come at it obliquely in terms of talking about gratitude as a generative energy and, be grateful for what you have as a way of, generating more. And so that overlaying on the parental element, right? Because every family system offers a series of curses, a series of blessings, and much of the original templates in life emerge in the intersection of those curses and those blessings, which are often intergenerational and cultural. And so, being grateful for the gifts that my parents gave me, seeking to forgive my parents, seeking to reconnect with the love for parents, using the Lazaris, tapes, etc., to forgive self and others. That has been, I would say, a minor sub-theme of, let's say, 10 or 20% of my energy and growth over the last 20 years. And I wanted to say a couple of things about that journey. The first thing I would say is that physiologically and also thus psychically, there is an enormous amount of energy bound up in what I would call a 4 to 6 year old boy that is absolutely terrified of being hit, that is expecting to be hit, both physically and with contempt, on an almost constant basis, and is projecting the source of that hitting to come from any authority figures, which in my life tend to be clients. And so, immediately I enter a client dynamic, there's a certain part of me that says, oh my gosh, I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be this. How can I avoid being punished? I go to a meeting, they didn't, I'm constantly aware of the faults, right, of my crew. And I'm constantly, dreading, like, what did those idiots get up to next, right? Oh my goodness, right? And then, but on the other side of that, I'm going to be beaten. I'm going to be hit because it's not good enough, And so, I would say that that's probably 40% of my whole interaction with work is as a 4 to 6 year old child expecting to be hit, viscerally living through the suspense of that. Now, so that has not shifted, not with a round of inner child work, as a teenager and adolescent work with the Lazaris material, not moving away from home, not giving up on the Lazaris material for 10 years and just saying this is just too much crazy making noise with no way to resolve all the inconsistent stuff. Let's just go do other things that work better. Not with increasing my salary, substantially, not with, it stayed as a constant, not with $150,000 of therapy. So that's one thing, right? That this physiological memory in my body is, I think it's something I ground to, right? That when I feel, PTSD, overwhelmed symptom, I look around for, like, who am I? And I'm the one who's terrified of being hit. And it's like, okay, I know that shape. So I've got something solid to hang on to. And I think that, that's the function of many PTSD memories, is to be something solid that never goes away in all of this chaotic thing. So I would say that that's the first thing, right? And so by extension, zero of my work with Lazaris has changed that dynamic. Whether it's working with the dark law, what was it? Well, anyway, zero of my work with Lazaris has changed that physiology. I would say zero of my work with therapy has changed that physiology. Now, admittedly, in the midst of a great meditation, in the midst of a great massage, in the midst of a great lovemaking, in the midst of, any number of things, there are intense, safe, healing experiences that come in front of that kind of root experience and engage me for a while, right? And then they go away, and that same root physiology is right there, right? So they come in front of it and hold attention, etc., but they don't actually take this physiology away. And this is, of course, incredibly frustrating. Because, all the self-help, all the diets, all the this, none of them touch this physiology, right? So that's, I think, noteworthy, and it's probably 60% of what I'm dealing with and have dealt with since the age of 4, right? So 60% of the chronic fatigue, of the depression, of the resentment, of the terror, of the hostility, of the shame, of the disorientation, of the anxiety, of the got to be in control, all of that, 60% of all that, right, is resting on top of this fear of being hit physically. But there's a secondary fear, which is the almost being hit and then being just looked at with contempt and hate, the hit emotionally. So, they're very closely linked. Like sometimes my parents would be about to hit me and they're just like, you fucking son of a bitch, right? Blaming me basically for wanting to hit me. And they both are equally devastating, right? So there it is. Now, the second thing that I find interesting is that in doing the shame work, in doing the forgiveness work, and doing the belief work, and doing in working with Lazaris, as well as working with a variety of other therapists, the core wound wasn't even scraped on the surface. Like the core wound and the presenting thing is a certain amount of numbness and exhaustion. Right? There's a certain amount of dissociation. That's the presenting level, right? Up here is dissociation, right? And down here is, a cacophony of pain and fear that kind of ties in with that sensation right before being hit. It's like, it's so much, I don't want to be in my body, right? So there's the dissociation of having left my body. Then there's the, I don't want to be in my body for this. I don't want to be in my body for this. This is too much, right? So that's right beneath that. Right beneath that is something saying, it's all my fault. Please don't hurt me. Whatever I need to do, please don't hurt me. And then there's scanning, beneath that, like scanning, like, how am I going to end up being the scapegoat in this situation, right? I've got to watch this and watch this and watch this, right? Because it's never presented in a sane way, right? So there's the kind of scanning and edge running and kind of control thing to manage that terror and avoid it the next time. Down here, there's a layer of dehumanization, right? Where basically I'm just in fight, flight, and freeze, and I've got to figure out how to survive in that dynamic. Down here is a bit of role playing where I'm identifying with my abuser, because identifying with the helpless kid who's being abused is so terrifying and uncertain and overwhelming. I don't want to identify with that. So I identify with the confidence and the cruelty and the control of the abuser, because that's solid, right? It's like in any dialogue, right? They're both inside, but who do you want to identify with, right? Don't hit me, right? If I identify with that, how do I move? How do I function, right? But if I identify with the cold, calculating control of the abuser, well, now I can function, right? I can hit this kid anytime I want. I can do this. I can, right? I have hatred. I have contempt. That's very grounding, solid, clear, dense energy. I know my whole identity crisis, my terror, my trauma evaporates because now I'm identifying, I'm holding the pattern of the abuser rather than the terror of the victim, right? And so there's that. And then as part of that identity, there's a certain amount of abuse of my younger siblings, right? Taking what my parents did to me and doing it to them, and thus using that behavior to reinforce my identity in the abuser so that I don't slip into the identity of helpless terror of the victim, right? But then there's going into the grief of having my humanity taken away from me, right? By reptiles, being raised by reptiles, being raised by people in a sociopathic state that blame and shout and terrify a sensitive child, right? So there's the grief around that. There's the anger. There's the disgust and horror, right? The horror, right, of seeing life, beauty, truth being eaten, right? Eaten by the demonic, by the reptilian, right? Eaten by snakes, cold-blooded, right? To avoid their feelings, right? To not be in their state of helplessness, to instead consume the unfairness, the horror, right? Of a giant feeding on their child, feeding on the child's innocence, consuming it, destroying it. You know, there's a sense of anger and hurt about that. But there's also the terror and wanting to ingratiate, right? Because, right, mom and dad are both so narcissistic and so incompetent, right? That one, you can have some pity on them, and two, right, if you try and enable them or appease them in a certain way, like we're really terrible kids, right? How bad it is for you to have to raise your own children. I mean, gosh, geez, right? Well, then they feel like, oh yeah, finally someone understands, right? So then the beating goes down a little bit, right? But it's a dissociation and transference, like my experience of being beaten, my experience of being abandoned, my experience of being lied to, my experience of being shamed. Who cares about that, right? We have to focus on the abuser and appease them, right, by minimizing their crimes on me so that they feel better about themselves and hit me less. There's also the terror and the transference, right? Redirecting some of my parents' hatred towards my younger siblings, right? Once I understood the pattern, right? To direct it that way, right? Because I don't want to be hit. And, you know, there's the dissociated power, like there's the learning to manipulate, right? Learning to manipulate and just to be dissociated from all this, to be in a sociopathic state and lift above grief, above horror, above all of that in a sociopathic state. In other words, the reveling in a sociopathic state to feel nothing at all, right? I remember when a very strong parental figure who actually was a much more competent mother than my mother was, my third grade teacher, right, when she died in an auto accident, was this elated rush of dissociation, right? I felt absolutely nothing. There was a euphoric void in the space of any grief or horror, etc., because it was just too much to deal with, right? And, you know, so these whole layers did not emerge in therapy, and they did not emerge in Lazaris work. They emerged in, you know, working with the truths coming from Robert Bly, Alice Miller, but also, you know, in deep suicidal depression, making sense of what was down, buried in the pit, right? And what I discovered was that deep down in the pit of cult and family denial, right, is this helpless, traumatized child, right? But his helpless trauma is obscured by the narcissistic deniability, right? There's no room for his feelings. There's no room for any of his grief, any of his desperation or need. That space is taken up by the need of narcissistic parents to obliterate, right? To obliterate and bury the wound, right? So the wound is buried by a parental need to obliterate all of the experience of that child. Now, having successfully buried it, now how is it done? I'll hit you if you keep crying. That's one way of obliterating it. Go to your room and don't come out until you're willing to lie and pretend that this never happened is another way of burying it. All right. Patronizing, oh gosh, we have to listen to our kids and they're feeling, oh my goodness, right? There's another way of burying it. Constant malicious humiliation is another way of burying it, right? Anything you talk about, I'll turn it into a joke and poke fun at you, right? So, and being busy and ignoring you is another way of obliterating it, right? So the wound is obliterated in an immense wall of hostility that says, don't you dare communicate anything about this wound, right? Or I will kill you, is the undertone feeling. Well, obliterating that wound has a numbing, frightening, disorienting, brainwashing impact. There's now that fear coming in. What do I, having obliterated the wound, there now has to be a pretense that the wound didn't exist, right? So first, the wound has to be given. Second, the wound has to be terrorized into silence. But third, as part of the concealment of the wound, we've got to pretend that it doesn't exist. And so having totally shattered any ability to communicate safely about that grief, about that terror, about the hurt, about the shame, about the rage, about the loneliness, then next comes the demand to mask it. And that comes with, how you doing today? Well, you don't want to know how I'm doing today. So what is it I'm supposed to make up that you want to pretend that you want to know? And I played this game with my mother for years. I mean, by the time I was 17, I was very lucid and clear that there were certain things that I couldn't finish one sentence without my parents going into a tantrum and tirade of martyrhood and all that. Good Lazaris clients, of course. And so, I just disconnected. Like, it was so humiliating to have someone pretend to be begging for, why won't you talk to us? Why? Because the thing you hate and fear and loathe more than anything else is the truth that I have to say. I'm sparing you. I mean, just count it as a blessing that I'm not talking to you. You do not want to hear. No, we do want to hear what you have to. What do you mean you don't want to? Well, right. And the first sentence, how could you? That's why I'm sparing you by not talking with you, right? You can't stand a sentence 20 years after the events. One sentence. You don't have space for it. So could we please stop the game that you want to hear what I have to say? Oh, but I do. I just want you to say this thing. Can't you see this instead? Right? So we have the manipulation, the cajoling, the insanity. I want you to go insane by pretending that we desperately want to be close to you, while attacking every single tiny step to get closer, right? So I want you to go crazy, right? So I want to hurt you bad. I want to beat the shit out of you for telling us that we hurt you bad. We want to completely erase it. Then we want to cover that with, how desperately we want a relationship with you. And then when you don't come forward into the trap, right, then we want to cover that as, oh, why? We're so victims, right, that our children don't want to have a relationship. All we want is just a few words. Just a few words here. Oh, just talk to us. We want to hear what you have to say. No, you don't, you goddamn motherfucking narcissistic bitch. You do not want to hear what we have to say, right? You want to hear what you've told us to say, right? Which, having been smashed into a small hole, buried, dozed over that, dump trucks of soil being dumped on that, right? Punished at every turn, whining and this and that. We've got the message. You don't want to hear what we have to say. Oh, we want to know. We want to know. Just please, right? And, this is so, and then, a number of my siblings have gone into this, like, we weren't terrible parents, were we? Right? Us good Lazaris friends, all that. We weren't terrible parents. No, you were wonderful, right? So, by the time you do this, right, there's still screaming down here. There's still, rage. There's still, is anyone going to come and pull any of this dirt off, right? Is anyone going to let this here? No, don't say a word. Because one of the things that happens initially, right, that's layered in here, right, is at first the healthy warrior, the healthy child wants to fight and say, no, back off, stop hitting me because you can't manage your emotions, right? You said, tell the truth. You lied. I pointed it out. Now you're hitting me. Cut it out, you fucking coward, right? So that's a healthy, expressive energy. But when you're dealing with a bully, a narcissistic Lazaris bully, no less, right? Who's, why are you creating your reality and all? When you're dealing with a fucking bully, right, who's 6 times bigger, right, who can cut off your allowance and all this stuff, right? It doesn't work when you're dealing with a fucking bully. It doesn't work to fight fair or ask for fair. They're too dumb, right? And so they increase the violence, right? Now, what this does is physiologically, whenever there's a healthy self-defense that comes out, there's another part that says, you're going to die, don't do it, don't say anything, don't defend yourself. But this is unfair, this is unreasonable, this is ridiculous. Don't do it, you're going to die, right? Right, so that's part of the splitting of the self, right? The healthy defender, the healthy warrior, attacks the self to appease a narcissistic asshole. Right? So that's in there too. Right? But but that's not good enough, right? The last thing they plead for constantly, please tell us we're wonderful parents. We did this, we did. Please, just another few things. No, we don't have time to listen to anything. No, we don't want to hear any. No, we don't want to connect with you in any. But please, right? Please, right? My mother calls up my siblings. How are you? She's typing away in the background. They start answering the same things I said before. Oh, that's nice. She asks the same questions she's asked 1,000 times. Doesn't listen to a single word. Isn't that nice? Isn't it nice we have this relationship? And, off she goes again. And, is it a wonder that my siblings are depressed or raged or, this and that, the other, right? But that's what she wants, right? So that she can feel better, right? It's all about her, right? So, so this layer upon layer, right? There's reflexes, there's anger, right? But when the wound is denied and the burying of the wound is denied, and the healthy warrior expression is murdered, And then the murder is denied. And then aren't we this wonderful, happy family where we do all these wonderful things for you? When all that is whitewashed, then and then you've been asked to go crazy, and then you've been asked to praise the offender, right? Then all this stuff becomes mysterious and dissociated from the abuse, right? Because the abuse is under now a concrete shell of denial and silence that's been solidified with humiliation and patronizing and busyness and all that, right? So that it's this horrific veneer, right, on top. And then little symptoms of shame or rage or resentment or whatever come out through the little off-gassing of all this murder and atrocity that's gone underneath, right? It leaks up. But why are you angry? What's this? Oh, are you angry? How can I help you? Right? Well, get this fucking veneer off, right? Let's talk about some of why I have to be insane to be in a relationship with you. What? Well, then, right, then it's, you're immature. You haven't grown up. You should have forgiven us by now, right? You should have done this, right? Why aren't you creating your reality? This, So this is, these little off-gassings become points of martyrhood and, the poor parents. I mean, poor parents, right? They didn't have a condom. The poor idiots, right? The poor idiots. They had to have 5 children. They couldn't find the condom, right? And these kids, they just kept coming out, right? It was nothing to do with us, right? So the amount of like up in here, this solid, numb, frozen lake of feelings. Like my father played the primary role. I guess it's a mixture of things. My mom is just too dumb and too committed to stupidity. So it's kind of, when you go into really deep, painful feelings and you're dealing with a complete idiot, I feel like an idiot for like, what am I telling this idiot for? I mean, what's wrong that I would spend time telling someone who's so out to lunch, like, why am I doing this? Like, I actually feel embarrassed or humiliated. That's like I'm trying to explain to a snake or a 3-year-old why I have grief as a 40-year-old. And it's like, you fucking bitch, right? There's nothing you'll let in. Nothing, right? And then on the other hand, what am I doing talking with a baby, right? What am I doing, right? Pretending that because she says the word she wants to know that means anything to her? I mean, what am I doing, right? So, there's so much frustration, there's so much rage, there's so much grief, so much loss, there's so much numbness. The loss of humanity from age 4. Right, and then their projection, right? They've got projection things, and then there was a whole period of my childhood where I became their projections just so I could exist, right? They had their little box, and if you didn't fit in their little box, you didn't exist. They wouldn't respond, they wouldn't see, they would deny it, they'd get upset. Then you'd fit in their little box, and they'd be like, "Oh, here's our cute little boy in our little box." And it's such a caricature of a human being, right? You have to play the role in the little box, and then you get a little bit of existence, right? As long as you stay in the box. It's just so humiliating, right? How do you deal with layer upon layer of humiliation with a complete moron? It doesn't work. It doesn't resolve, right? And with my father, his systematic cruelty, tearing apart every little fucking thing and twisting it around and around and around to cause maximum humiliation and never getting in the ring, right? How are you feeling? Well, I'm not going to tell you, well, how are you feeling, Dad? Well, no, I asked you first. How are you feeling? Well, we'll twist it around and make you feel dumb for feeling it, right? Okay. Anyone else? How are you feeling, right? right? So winding up, right, and bottling up all this thing, right? And then it would just hit you if you talk back to your parents, right? So there's just all these layers of stuff. I had no idea how it was designed, right? I just felt kind of spacey numb around this, right? But you have to forgive people for all this stuff. So this design, right? And I would say that it's a cult design. It's not just a parent design. Our culture has, agreed in a whole variety of ways that these deep patterns and emotions will not be expressed, will not be honored, will not be validated. And there's all kinds of little defensive roads trying to shunt you back into the system of kind of shameful, frustrating, rat racy kind of conformity. But I had no idea how all this was designed, right? But, Lazaris says I should forgive for me, right? So I go in there, feel numb. What's wrong with me? Do I have payoffs? I don't want to forgive my parent, blah, 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 blah. So that just gets tied into the thing, right? So in, 20 years of doing parental forgiveness stuff, there's never been any great epiphany, whatever, right? And Lazaris doesn't have the decency to say something like, our techniques do not work a great percentage of the time for a wide variety of reasons. Life is complex, and don't beat yourself up about it, and don't, there's plenty of stuff that we're not very good at statistically. And I think that's, what I would say long before giving a forgiveness ritual or proselytizing forgiveness is a couple of things, right? Number one is let's go into an empathic understanding of all these layers of the wound and how they build on top of one another and come back to a bit. Now, I've never heard Lazaris in 1,000 hours go through that. And yet I would submit that the reason that the majority of Lazaris friends are depressed, addicted, not happy with what their, quote, magical magician lives are, have conflicts with their romantic partners as much or more than the average person, feel shame that they're not a good enough metaphysician, blah, blah, blah. I would say that the reason that you will statistically find that, if Concept Synergy ever has the decency to do a poll of all the Lazaris friends and, go through this and do it as metadata, right? So that all the people aren't trying to look good for their parents at Lazaris and Concept Synergy, which is once you've been traumatized in at a young age, like 4 to 6 years old, like I am, it makes absolutely no sense to say something like, we're not your parents, right? Go to a 6-year-old and tell them, when they're upset and traumatized that nobody's their parent, right? It doesn't matter, right? A 6-year-old projects that somewhere in the world there is a competent adult willing to step into the parental role, and they will keep projecting until someone plays that role. And that is a healthy thing for a 6-year-old to do, right? And when you are traumatized in a regressed state, that part of you is a child at 6 years old. And if that's the dominant part of you, because it's unresolved trauma, and trauma is the most intense emotional state that the typical human being has or is experiencing, then it's just mindfuck to say, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, do you think it's a rational decision on my part to say, okay, here's a new client. Let's imagine that they're going to hit me and get all anxious and miserable about it. and just keep doing that until I feel massive amounts of anxiety and suicidal depression. I mean, you have to be pretty fucked up to think that's the strategy, right? So, but what's my workaround? Microdosing mushrooms is the most effective, way better than anything Lazaris is doing that I'm aware of. So that gives some relief and some windows of clarity and all that, right? Shaming myself, why am I creating this? Complete bullshit, right? Just makes things significantly more complicated and convoluted. Not doing work is a good approach, right? Just not having anyone in that role, right? So that's another approach. Retiring early basically is one of my strategies, and working less to avoid being in that dynamic. Another good strategy. But this, I have never seen anyone, let alone a Lazaris friend, go into these layers of pain and break down the architecture. The best I've seen are a few people who are pretty conscious doing ayahuasca, who will talk about that core initial wound and the layer and layer and layer and layer that's built upon it and how it results in all the complications, of the later life. And so, between going to Lazaris and doing competent ayahuasca, I would say ayahuasca is cheaper and more useful in many respects. But it also has risks in our current state, right? Where the most incompetent people, the most wounded people, tend to pick the worst guides to do stuff, right? So you can really fuck yourself up with an incompetent healer or shaman, which I've done. And so, it's tricky. You can't fuck yourself up too much with Lazaris. You can go into debt, as many have, and you can sit around wondering, what am I doing wrong, as many have. But you're not likely to have a psychotic break or, exaggerate schizophrenia because you've got a schizophrenic shaman who doesn't want to deal with their shit. Now, this breakdown, looking at the 10 or 12 layers of loneliness, is another way of looking at it, where this is hidden, and then that hides that, and then that hides that, and then that hides that, and that hides that. And because this was hidden, projections cover all of those layers, and so I've actually found that human beings in our cult are very, very poor at weeding through the projections. People make up stories and projections all the time, and every time I check in with someone and say, if they've got some courage and a little intelligence to take the time to see what they're scripting and their projections, I can pause them and I can say, what did you project was going on right there? And they'll say, well, you seem to be doing this for this and this and this reason. I've never found someone who correctly projects. And then when I did this, what did you think there? Well, I thought this, 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 and this. It's like, no, that wasn't correct either, right? I'm doing this because of this, and I'm doing that because of that, and the reason, the data points that it connects to is over here. Did you have any sense that that might be a possibility? And they say, no, that never occurred to me. Right, so people take, these 10, 11 layers of burying of reality, and they fill them with inaccurate projections that fit the cult narrative, but have nothing to do with what's actually going on. Now, how can you forgive a bunch of cult narratives and projections that have nothing to do with what's going on? You can't. So, right, I would say I'm still getting to grips with reality as revealed through my body. I'm still getting to grips with that. And it's not easy because it's I haven't found a good therapist that will take me in there. I haven't found people competent and interested enough to go there. Right? I find plenty of people off-put by it, including my entire family. So where do you go there with? Right? How do you go into horrific traumatic pain where you need help alone because no one has the decency to go there? Well, it's a catch-22. It's a difficult one, right? So working with unseen friends, including Lazaris, is useful there. But you can't forgive anything unless you're dealing with all those layers. Now, the other thing is, let's say, now that I'm aware of that, I'm doing this because of that, and I'm doing that because of that, and I'm doing that because of that, and I'm doing that because of that, and that because of that. And down here is this, terrified, lonely, traumatized infant, buried in the pit, right, of cult denial. Okay. So there it is. What to do there? What to do, right? Because there's still body memories, right? I still feel like I'm going to die when I assert a boundary that is part of my healthy boundaries. And so if I assert the boundary while feeling I'm going to die, then I have all kinds of adrenal collapse, etc., because I'm doing something while expecting to die by doing it, while my mind is saying that's not rational, do it. So I'm divided, I'm terrified, my body expects to die, and I defend my boundary, or I'm calm and relaxed while I let another person violate my boundary. Neither one of those is an enjoyable outcome. And Lazaris has taught me nothing effective around my physiology. Why? Because Lazaris doesn't do physiological stuff. He will say, imagine this and sense all your senses, right? I've done probably at least 1,000 hours of Lazaris meditations, if not 3,000 hours. Probably closer to 3,000 hours of Lazaris meditation. So Lazaris would transfer all of his incompetency, all of their incompetency to their clients. Like, if you were ready, if this, if that, if you loved yourself, if this or that, then, our techniques would work. No doubt. And Lazaris, right? If you're completely fucked up, shame-based, lonely, traumatized with PTSD, and you have an incredibly competent friend who knows what a competent friend is and looks like, you resolve all of that. That's also true. Well, Lazaris is not that incredibly competent friend. Right? Lazaris produces their tapes and sells their friendship, and sometimes it works a little bit, and sometimes it's temporary, and right? But Lazaris does not take any responsibility in terms of saying, well, that's on us. But that was actually one of the healthier things that I did for my wife, who was quite traumatized when I met her, was, I said, listen, I've learned from Lazaris, I've learned from these guys, I've learned from incompetent therapists, I have idiot role models as parents, right? So I'm going to do the best I can to be a healthy person around you and for you, but don't expect me to succeed, right? I may be more healthier than your fucked up family. That's not hard to do. Right? I may be more healthy than your fucked up cult. That's not hard to do. But if this isn't resolving, right, just know that I don't know what I'm doing. And because of that, I can't be a better friend than I can be. And it's very important that you do not keep raveling this up as it's all your fault. Right? That's her favorite statement, it's all my fault. It's never, ever, ever, from the time she was 2 years old, been all her fault. Right? So at least I could give her that, right? I'm a fucked up moron, right? In a fucked up moronic cult, right? And So, of course, I don't know how to be terribly competent. It's not hard to be more competent than average, but average is such a low standard that this is not going to work fully, right? Look at my own life. It's not working fully. But it will be a step forward. And if you find anyone else who can do a better job, then off you go. And I think that is medicinal to a shame-based, traumatized child in a grown-up body, is to stop pretending that it's all their fault and that they need to do something, and it's a circle, right? Everyone in the circle can do a better job than they're doing, and will do so in time as they grow and evolve. But it is a shared dynamic, right? And so, I take that on in part because I find it so unhealthy that Lazaris doesn't. And also, I find it less blinding. Like if I pretend that I'm this great metaphysician who knows everything, all this stuff, and then it doesn't work. There's so many fucked up idiots that blame the patient or blame the client or, that doesn't make any sense. You picked that person to be in a relationship with. You chose that person to be your client. You told them this would work. It didn't. Right? You didn't see that it wasn't going to work. If you'd said, try this, it's not going to work, well, then you could say you're omnipotent, but you said, try it, it might work, right? You didn't know. So don't pretend you know more than you know. So I'd much rather say, okay, well, based on this book and this and this and this seems to have good odds of working. Give it a shot. Tell me how it works. Oh, it worked. Great. Wonderful. That didn't work. Great. I don't know what I'm doing, right? You don't know what you're doing. We're in a cult that doesn't know what it's doing. So what a surprise. Plenty of things don't work. So that's, I think that's good. But, the amount of grief, the amount of shame, the amount of stress that I have carried and carry around this fear of being hit, I think it's absolutely meaningless to even attempt to, quote, forgive that before releasing it. Now, this is what Alice Miller talks about, and which I find absolutely right, because there have been other dynamics of other abusers, in this case, Peter Sandhill at the Human Awareness Institute and his cohorts of highly incompetent leaders and therapists who turned out not to be licensed and blah, blah, blah. But, when I had my major downfall into PTSD due to their, pushing for overdoses and psychedelics and then escalating a sexual relationship under psychedelic influence and blah, 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 I read through the litany of crimes in relationship to best practices in therapy after the fact. But the trouble is when you're dumb, you don't know that you're dumb. And when you're dumb, you don't know that your therapist is dumb, right? That's the problem with being dumb, right? And our cult is very good at raising a lot of dumb people because it's a very psychologically dumb cult, right? It not only doesn't facilitate a lot of scientific emotional literacy, it goes out of its way to shame and silence and suppress the emotional literacy that would occur naturally in a cult in which you don't shame people for feeling, right? So we're not only a dumb cult, right? We're a shame-based dumb cult. It's worse than a psychologically literate cult. It's worse than a neutral cult. We go out of our way to brainwash people to go backwards. And then we set them off on their own and judge them for going backwards. It's pretty dumb, pretty cruel, pretty insane, pretty fucked up, right? It's incredibly heartbreaking. That's the cult we're in, right? So, what to do? What to do? Well, what Alice is discovering, and like what I found, like I was thrown for a loop, 500% more symptoms after my work with Peter Sandhill and his cohorts. And, I found myself feeling hate, which I'd never consciously registered feeling hate for anyone before. And it was because I was in a massively overwhelmed, painful state, did not know how to get out of it. And every time I asked for help, I was pushed in the wrong direction to cover up the crimes of my abusers, right? Very much what happened as a child. But this time I knew what was going on, right? A bit of my mind was watching the thing and saying, wow, my therapists are doing what my parents are doing, and the only difference is I paid for it, right? Of course, I stopped paying for it, but then they were highly incentivized to silence and cover it up, so they kept doing the abuse for free at that point. But that's spending time in that hell, year after year, month after month, buried down in here and watching the dump truck loads get dumped on top as lie after lie was told to cover up the abuse, and realizing that the best of me was being sacrificed to protect the worst of them, and realizing that's what happened as a child, right? So in that sense, you could say that because the Lazaris techniques were so ineffective, or because my application of the Lazaris techniques were so ineffective, because my therapists were so ineffective, or because my interaction with therapists were so ineffective, it's all of it, right? I had to recreate the entirety of my childhood abuse with a therapist just to figure out what the fuck was going on, right? Meanwhile, all the friends that aren't going to Lazaris are all going to, what is that other one? Abraham and the law of attraction and be grateful for everything, right? So being grateful for all this cruelty doesn't cut it, right? It's just another thing on the top to make sure we don't look at what's down in this territory, right? We live in a cult of cowards, right? Strangers look at kids being brutalized in our country. They say, oh God, that kid is going to get it. That is a miserable family to be raised in. And they don't confront the abuser. They say, let the 6-year-old deal with it. I don't want to deal with that, right? This happened again around the abuse with Peter Sandhill. I went to another therapist and he said, gosh, I said, could you have help, because this therapist is fucking up a bunch of other clients as well. And I'm now aware of the impact of that. So we should stop that therapist fucking as many people up. You know what the therapist said? He said, they sound really dangerous to me. I don't want to get involved. I'm scared. Maybe they'll come after me in some way. So let's let those other fucked up patients get hurt as well, because I don't want to get involved, right? The courage in therapy is just astounding. But then again, does Jach want to get involved with the impact of any of his tapes or anything else? No. I mean, the courage Lazaris inspires is incredible in its absence, right? So what Alice Miller pointed out is that hate, you don't shame yourself for feeling hate, and you don't forgive to let go of hate. You become competent and powerful and independently resourced, and the hate dissolves automatically. And that is exactly right. Because as an emotionally illiterate cult, we do not understand the ingredients in hate. But hate has a very important mix. And one of the things that you need in order for hate to exist is you need hurt, you need betrayal, you need hurt, so a lot of pain, but you also need powerlessness or helplessness. Now, if you are hurt and powerful, you get out of the hurt with your power, no problem. If you are hurt and somebody does not betray you into that hurt but helps you out of it, no problem. There's no hate. If you are hurt and somebody betrays you into that hurt and pain, but you are powerful and you just walk away from that person and say, I'm not going to deal with those idiots. They're sadistic and stupid, and I'm not going to deal with them. Well, then you walk out of your hate. But if you are powerless and helpless and hurt and betrayed, you will feel enormous hate. Now, Lazaris and others may say, forgive or focus on. No, fuck that. It does not work as effectively as seeking power. Now, the first level of power that I found from my abuser was transparency. Right? I had the power to speak. It's not easy, but I had the power to speak. I created that power. I made videos like these. I put them up on a website like this and communicated and gave the website the names of the Human Awareness Institute, my perpetrators. And they, of course, tried to sue me, right? It wasn't their issue to deal with me or help me, right? They kept denying that it had anything to do with them. But it was, of course, their issue to protect their image, right? So no help for the client, help to suppress the client. That's what sociopaths do when they don't want their crimes to be revealed, right? So they had all this energy to try and silence, but when they took me to court, a European court, to try and get the domain that they didn't bother to buy but didn't want anyone else to know about, right? And this is where Concept Synergy is healthier than the Human Awareness Institute, right? They didn't try and stop this website. But they lost the suit, right? So they were stuck, right? They were stuck with the truth coming out about their various illegal activity, etc. So that created power. They silenced me in various ways, but then I broke through the silence, which created a power, an ability, a freedom, an ability and willingness to act. Well, I hated them less after that, right? Because there's replacing powerlessness with power. The other thing is I started doing the opposite of what I'd learned. Right? I realized that my parents and my therapists were good examples of what not to do. And since doing what they had recommended and stuff had caused so much harm, I began doing all kinds of things that were the exact opposite of what they had said to do, and my life got better. So I thought, I'm not totally helpless now. I have a reasonable odds if I do the opposite of what my therapist said that things will get better. There was another crappy therapist when I met my wife. He said, your wife is a very bad influence on you. I said, well, you've been wrong. You've been wrong on almost all of the people I've asked you about that. So why don't I take that as a good sign? And I'll just do the opposite, right? And since nobody's helping me validate these things, let me help my then kind of acquaintance, right? But it went from acquaintance to student to friend to lover to wife, right? But I thought, let me help my acquaintance by being helpful to them, right? I'm annoyed, nobody's helping me, let me be helpful, right? So I just did the opposite of what my therapists were doing. My therapist said, has nothing to do with us, it's not our fault. So I told my friend, I said, it's nothing to do with you, right? If my advice doesn't work, you're off the hook. I'll come up with better advice, right? Take it off of you, right? So, and it worked, right? So her life shot up at a speed faster than I've seen almost anyone's life shot up, right? Her life skills are up 7,000%. Her well-being is up 300 to 500% at a stable level. It's probably 350 is probably a good average because hedonic adaptation kicks in. You go back to your set point, but still massive, increase in well-being. Her power is up, etc. And she hates herself less the more her power goes up, right? So just do the opposite, right? But now you're no longer helpless. Like if you do what people say to do and things get worse, you feel powerless, right? What do I do, right? So, once, and then I nearly went bankrupt and I hated them for that. So I made a bunch of money, right? And then nothing to hate them for there, right? So becoming powerful and competent and being able to, at this point, right? At this point, I'm probably lucky to have nothing to do with them. And I don't need to. So why hate them? Meaning, I don't need to do the forgiveness ritual and see if I'm doing good enough, whatever. I just need to bring my own reality in relationship with the abuser to a point where I don't need them, I don't expect anything from them, I don't want them, and I'm doing and creating and meeting my needs and preferences on my own. If I do that, the hate, the fear, the anger, the resentment just falls away naturally. You don't need to do the forgiveness meditation and all that. If you don't do that, if you're saying, gosh, my fucking life, if only I had not trusted my therapist, I wouldn't be broke, I wouldn't be this. True, right? True. So in the state of being broken, depressed, and frustrated and helpless, of course, hate is the byproduct of betrayal, hurt and pain, and powerlessness, right? As soon as that, now, you can't stop someone betraying you, right? Obviously, if you were smart enough not to trust them, they wouldn't have betrayed you in the first place, right? But once they betrayed you, you can't stop that, right? The hurt and the pain of being betrayed, that's painful. You can't work at it there. But the powerlessness and the helplessness of this is just going to go on forever and spinning down into control, that is something that I have been working on. And I feel better and better about them. Sometimes I even laugh, dumb fucks, idiots, right? Well, we all do that sometimes, right? But that's on the other side of gaining a lot of power and competency. The same is true with I'm in a much better mood making this video than I was when I made the first kind of frightened, helpless videos around why won't Jach talk to me? Why won't Lazaris make sense? Why won't Lazaris do? Because, right, I've gotten competent enough that if Lazaris was to disappear from my life, things might get better. Right? They might get a little worse, but I'm not going to, tailspin down, right? And in certain fragile states during all this trauma, I wasn't sure about that, right? And so I'm much more angry. Lazaris, come on, do something, right? Make a fucking tape about PTSD. How about that, Lazaris, right? That works for once, right? It works. But, I found other things that work. Going for a daily run, right? It works, but I didn't know it worked, right? But now I know it works, right? Going for a daily run, it works. Now I know it works, right? So I don't have to get as worked up with incompetent people that don't work, but I don't need them to work, right? And so I would say that having failed repeatedly for 2 decades to get forgiveness to work with Lazaris, and not know why other than maybe there's something wrong with me, And having let go of enormous amounts of fear, anger, resentment, hurt, self-pity, just charge, by simply getting more competent. And so like when I hate my employees for making me look bad and da-da-da-da-da, when I figure out, as I have been doing various things that stop that or get better employees or whatever, the resentment, the hate, the fear, just gone. It's no longer necessary, right? But if I have to listen to a client telling me how shitty my crew are, and they are shitty, and I don't know what to do about it, and I'm waiting to be hit, and it's terrifying, and it's my most worst fear, I think, you goddamn motherfucking crew, why can't any of you pay any attention to anything, right? Well, then I hate them, right? Because I feel dependent. I feel like right? So but now that I got rid of the most annoying one, who's the most determined not to learn anything, right? The others are determined not to learn much, but slows things down. I can keep up with their mistakes. And what were you thinking there? Do it differently. Do that differently, right? So then I have and I can still survive, right? So then tons of crappy employees in the world. I don't have to hate them all, right? And so it just falls away. When there's no more fear, there is no more hate. When there is power, there is no more fear. Power, all meaningful power, is the ability to confidently create what you want. If I can confidently create a satisfied client that pays me, there's nothing to fear around my crew or anyone else. So there's nothing to hate, right? If I can't do that and everyone around me seems like they're taking me down in this spiral towards my worst feeling, then I hate everyone. Fucked up client, why didn't they do this? The crew, why didn't they manufacture? Why did they ship the material and the one day I wasn't there to receive it? You dumb fucks, right? I'm just railing, right? Because I'm out of control and I'm drifting towards my worst possible feeling that I never want to feel again. And I get set up to feel that way again and again and again. I want to kill someone, right? You motherfuckers, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm in a cult that doesn't know what it's doing. I'm helpless, right? But as soon as I create power, no, I'm not working for that client. They're too dumb. I'm not working for that client. I'm not hiring this crew. They're not only dumb, they're arrogant, meaning they don't know that they're dumb, and so they do it wrong without even asking, right? So, no, right? I'm not going off and going on a vacation, right? I have a crew that needs micromanaging to have things go right. Okay, so I'm going to micromanage, right? And I don't want to be overwhelmed with all the micromanagement, so I'm going to take a break, right? So as soon as I have a power to create what I want in a way that doesn't take me into my root terror again and again, then I'm fine, right? No need to particularly forgive anyone. The panic and all that is there. I feel great. I have a high energy. No need to do the forgiveness meditation. If I'm not in that place, taking time to do the forgiveness meditation, I just feel worse. And then I feel like, what am I doing it wrong? And then I feel, what's Lazaris doing wrong? And da-da-da-da-da. So I think Alice Miller has it right. And I'm making this recording because I suspect that 20% of Lazaris friends with an open mind who might be beating themselves up around the ineffectiveness of forgiveness and all that would find this to be helpful. And that's, no one was there to explain all this to me. People are always there judging me for criticizing Lazaris in any way whatsoever, right? So there again, the power to break that cycle, right? To be a part of something a little different, where there is really freedom of speech, freedom of thought, a focus on what works, and hopefully a little care and a little love in taking the time to communicate what works.